So unfortunately, I couldn't make the start of today's lesson. However, I did catch up on everything they had been discussing. They started off by discussing the Brechtian style, and I found that a lot of the ideas that they were saying were a lot matched with what I'd found out in my research. They also had a small discussion on the Brechtian technique, gestus. I found that in my research that gestus referred to a character gesture that captured a moment or attitude. Gestus also a gesture that shows the type of person a character is or their social role. Gestus also refers to when a gesture makes a social comment. So they had a discussion on what that gestus was, the definition, and they also applied gestus to the play Our Country's Good, which we would be looking at an extract from. So some of the things they were looking at was the set, props, costume, proxemics, and the characters. So in the set, they thought that the hold, because it's kind of set on a boat, would be low, dark, claustrophobic. They'd also have flags of their country around, because they're military, show their patriotism. So it's kind of the props which they suggested we would use were chains, whips, guns, flags, money, so that the chains signified the lack of freedom and the imprisonment of the convicts. Things like the whips and the guns, they showed the violence and the viciousness of the soldiers. The flags again showed their patriotism and the kind of why they're there, because they are military, they're soldiers. The flags represent and are symbolic of the military and their country. And then money, of course, is kind of symbolic of corruption and conspiracy. Also greed. So the costumes we talked about was using period clothes, which fits with the historicism which Brecht liked to include in his piece, in his theatre. He took historicism as a convention of his style. They also thought about how the costumes would differ based on their financial status. So the rich would have nicer clothing, finer clothing than those who are poorer, so the soldiers who are richer and have money will have nicer, richer looking clothing than the convicts who wouldn't have any money at all. They also talked about proxemics, so kind of where people would be based on their status and their social role, and how they interact with each other. So proxemics means like how the characters are stood in relation to each other and what that shows. So someone of higher status may be shown higher up, or in a position of, well, higher up because again that's a position of power, or maybe like in the centre because again showing a position of power. And again, alternatively, a lower status person may be closer to the ground, because that will show that their status is lower than those around them. And this kind of symbolism is common in Brechtian plays. So also character, they talked about. So again, establishing the powerful people, the slaves, where people stand based on race and accent. Oh, well, what kind of accent they would use, and how. Also, this is kind of how people would act based on whether they're powerful, whether they're slaves, whether they're race, or their accent. Because Brecht liked to use characters as, instead of making them, well, again, characters, established people, he used a lot of will use characters as representations of a type of person. So then I was here for this bit of the lesson, and when I got there, we moved on to being shown pictures of stills from different plays, and were asked to establish which ones were Brechtian plays. and they were all the pictures we were shown were from Brechtian plays. I will post the pictures beneath this video, and as you can see, all the costumes, they look from the time period that the plays are set. However, there is often something a little off kilter about them, something a little bit different that makes a political statement. For example, if you see the Charlie Chaplin one, he is dressed like a soldier, but if you look closer, what he's wearing is like bits of kitchen appliances. He has like a razor attached to him, and all this kind of makes all these kind of things attached to him make a political statement. Also, something else you may notice is one of the photos, there is someone who should kind of represent a judge, and in his hair is like, it has been twisted into something that looks like a noose, and that again kind of shows how he's put people to death, and this kind of corruption, and how it kind of represents his character as putting so many people to death, and symbolic of that, which is something which Brecht often uses with his costumes. So we then moved on to designing staging for a scene. So I will post our picture down below as well, below this video. So our group, because we're split into lots of different groups, did Act 2, Scene 6, which was a scene on where Liz is about to be hanged. And so we decided to create a set where there is like a boat outline, and then in front of the boat is chains, which this boat is because they are across the sea from their home country. They travel by boat, and there's this kind of whole, they are by the sea. Then we thought that we would have the chains, which would represent the lack of freedom and how they're captured on this island. Well, how they're captured in this country, and in this prison. We also thought we'd have flags representing their country, the military base, and all that. This kind of use of gestures and having these flags showing their patriotism, but also like representative of the military. So we thought about lighting as well. So we thought what we'd have is something that's very typical of contemporary theatre, but we'd have a projection of a hanging rope projected onto the background of the piece, and we'd have all the way through the play we thought we'd have it quite shadowy, and the rest of the action being lit by harsh light, and then just having this shadowy projection at the back. Harsh white light being typical lighting for Brecht, because Brecht, there's a quote saying the white light illuminates the truth. So that's why we kind of thought that we'd have this typical harsh white light lighting up the rest of the show, and then just having this shadowy black hanging rope, which kind of the shadows represent how it is kind of ominously there and always like a risk and danger, but it's not quite clear yet. So it isn't the main focus of the show just yet, but it is a focus, and it does draw the audience's attention as it's kind of always there, this kind of risk of death and this fear which is placed over the comics. So this is something that the audience can think about as they can see this hanging rope. As it gets to this scene, we thought that the hanging rope should become clearer so the audience can now see it, and this kind of represents how she is close to death and how this rope is now being used. During this scene, we thought that the rest of the boat should be more shadowy, including the flag, which kind of shows, the shadowiness of the flag represents the injustice and symbolic of the guards exploiting justice in the name of a warped sense of patriotism to justify this hanging. And this kind of way we did it with the lighting, with the theatre, it really creates that sense of or symbolism, which is often used. So we talked about costume as well. So there's 3 characters on stage in our scene: Ketch, Harry, and Liz. Ketch is a convict, so we thought his costume would be all of them will be in period clothes, and Ketch would be in a more convict like costume, so more basic, just kind of period overshirt, dirty, not very pleasant looking. Then we have Harry. Harry is one of the guards, so he'll be in uniform. However, we thought he would be a bit dusty, a bit dishevelled, because they've kind of been there so long, and also the dust kind of symbolises that their corruption and the way that they're not exactly pure and just. We also thought he would have a gun to his side, which would, well, one, he was quite realistic how he would wear it, so sticking to the historicism, but also the gun shows his control of the situation and also the kind of threat of violence. Liz, in comparison, she's a convict and she is about to be hanged, so she is of lowest status. We thought baggy clothes, the convict dress, again very basic, but also very baggy to show the lack of food, as she's quite starved, and they would be dirty and ragged, which shows her very lack of status, her lack of human rights kind of thing. We also thought she would be draped in chains, and chains around her wrists, to show that she is not free. She is being forced into this, and to show that kind of entrapment of her. So the proxemics which we discussed was, well, we used the use of gestures to show their social status. Again, so Liz is sat while the others are standing, to show that she has the lowest status in the group. She remains unemotional and unresponsive, which will create a contrast to Harry, who is shouting. Despite the shouting, we decided that she doesn't stand until she is forced up, which we wanted to do to represent the construct of defiance, and which is a reaction to the injustice of the situation. And we use Liz to show defiance, and to show defiance against corruption. So the others, Ketch and Harry, would have surrounding Liz, kind of stood up around her, which will show that they're dominating her. They have the highest status in the situation. They are being dominating, intimidating, and they're just kind of this intimidating presence. And the fact that they're closed in around her creates like a claustrophobic sort of image that shows that clearly that they have the control in the situation. So we then started on our country's good extract. We were assigned which roles we were going to play. So my role is the Captain Campbell, who is a drunken captain. This drunkenness kind of represents the soldiers' or the guards' gluttony, which, in comparison to the convicts who are starved, shows again their corruption and morals. And this drunkenness, again, it represents their gluttony as well as their immorality. He is a follower. He follows, from reading the script, we found he follows Ross and often jumps on the bandwagon of what Ross is is saying. He is very much against the play and finds it amusing that the convicts will be acting in a play. So we're going to learn, we decided that we'd learn our lines for next week, and we will fully and properly block it out and set up the staging next week.